In 1954, the world witnessed something straight out of a nightmare, a dog with two heads. Not a myth, not a movie. A living, breathing, two-headed creature stitched together in a Soviet laboratory. The mastermind? A scientist named Vladimir Demikhov, a man some called a genius and others a monster. His bizarre experiment horrified the world and raised a chilling question. Was this the future of medicine, or a dangerous step too far? Vladimir Demikhov wasn't just another Soviet scientist. He was a man obsessed with pushing the limits of biology. Born in 1916, his early work focused on something that sounded like science fiction at the time: organ transplantation. Remember, this was long before modern medicine even considered heart transplants possible. But Demikhov? He was already experimenting with replacing hearts and lungs in animals. His ultimate dream? To make organ transplants a reality for humans. He believed that if he could successfully replace a failing heart or lung in a dog, the same principles could one day save millions of lives. But in the brutal scientific race of the Cold War, where the Soviet Union was desperate to outshine the West, Demikhov's methods were about to take a disturbing turn. Imagine a small Soviet laboratory in the 1950s. No modern anesthesia, no advanced medical technology. Just a surgeon, a scalpel, and two unsuspecting dogs. Demikhov's plan? To surgically attach the head and upper body of a small puppy onto the neck of a fully grown stray dog. It wasn't just an experiment. It was a gamble against nature itself. With incredible precision, he connected the smaller dog's major blood vessels to the larger host, ensuring that both brains were receiving oxygen. The result? A nightmarish success. The two-headed dog blinked, licked its lips, and moved both sets of heads independently. But survival came at a cost. The creatures never lasted more than a few days before their bodies gave in to the inevitable. But despite the horror, Demikhov wasn't finished. He would go on to create more than 20 of these grotesque hybrids, each one surviving just a little longer than the last. And the world was watching. But not everyone saw Demikhov as a visionary. The world wasn't just shocked, it was outraged. Animal rights activists, scientists, and the general public saw the two-headed dogs as a gruesome violation of nature. Newspapers branded Demikhov as a real-life Frankenstein. Some accused him of playing God, pushing the limits of science with no regard for suffering. The ethical debate surrounding his work was unavoidable. Was his experiment a necessary evil for medical progress, or just a cruel spectacle? Even today, bioethicists wrestle with the same question. One modern scientist put it bluntly: Demikhov's work paved the way for modern organ transplants, but at what cost? The suffering of these animals raises the fundamental question of whether the ends truly justify the means. Yet, despite the outrage, one undeniable fact remains. His research changed medicine forever. It's easy to dismiss Demikhov's experiments as barbaric, but his work laid the foundation for one of the most important medical breakthroughs in history: heart and organ transplantation. Before him, the idea of replacing a failing heart was pure fantasy. But Demikhov proved it was possible, at least in animals. His surgical techniques directly influenced the first successful human heart transplant in 1967. Today, thousands of people are alive because of the very procedures he pioneered in his Soviet lab. From heart transplants to organ preservation techniques, his gruesome experiments paved the way for life-saving medicine. But while some saw a revolutionary scientist, others saw a propaganda tool. In the 1950s, the USSR wasn't just competing in nuclear arms and space exploration. They were locked in a scientific arms race with the West. Anything that made the Soviet Union look superior was celebrated, no matter how controversial. Demikhov's grotesque yet groundbreaking work was used as proof that Soviet science was ahead of the West. Soviet propaganda showcased his experiments as evidence that the future of medicine belonged to the USSR. But history has a way of twisting scientific achievements into something else entirely. Demikhov's two-headed dogs didn't just haunt science journals, they crawled into pop culture. His experiments inspired some of the most disturbing horror movies and books ever made. Ever heard of The Human Centipede? The grotesque premise of surgically joining bodies together echoes Demikhov's work. Even Stranger Things takes inspiration from Soviet-era experiments gone wrong. And in classic horror, mad scientists experimenting on bodies is a trope that traces back to real figures like Demikhov. But here's the real question. Has anything changed? Today we're standing at the edge of a new scientific frontier: gene editing, CRISPR, and AI-driven medical advancements. Scientists are now altering DNA itself, tweaking the genetic code of embryos, and even discussing the possibility of resurrecting extinct species. The same ethical questions raised by Demikhov's work are still haunting us today. How far is too far? If creating a two-headed dog was seen as monstrous, what about modifying human embryos? What about combining human and animal DNA? The debate is no longer just about two-headed dogs. It's about the future of humanity itself. The final question: was it worth it? Demikhov performed over 20 two-headed dog transplants before abandoning the experiments. Each time, the creatures suffered a slow, inevitable decline, yet his research revolutionized medicine, leading to surgical advancements that save countless lives today. So, was it worth it? Was Demikhov a visionary pioneer who sacrificed a few to save many? Or was he a reckless scientist who crossed lines that should never have been crossed? One historian summed it up perfectly. Demikhov didn't just test the limits of science, he tested the limits of morality, and the world is still grappling with the consequences. What do you think? We want to hear from you. Was Demikhov's work a necessary step in medical progress, or an unforgivable act of cruelty? Vote in the poll below and let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy diving into the dark, untold stories of history, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon. More shocking stories are coming your way. Until next time, stay curious, but beware of the fine line between genius and madness.